spanning a 15-year period, and much to my dismay, I don't believe we have seen the end of it just quite yet. I grew up in a small town, in a nice neighborhood that was surrounded by these little patches of forest that separated houses and even entire blocks from another. These patches were all connected with trails that eventually led to the actual big forest that started from behind my parents' house, one of the smaller trails ran behind their house as well. Basically, this neighborhood was every child's dream to grow up in. All the neighbors knew each other, so it was a pretty safe neighborhood. There were lots of other kids to play with, and the endless but familiar trails provided the most exciting surroundings for games. I was never afraid to play by myself in the forest either, or to walk home from a friend's house after dark. I would sleep with my drapes open and not think much of it. My parents hardly ever locked the doors for the night. This all changed when the rutabaga showed up. For all I know, he could have been living in the area for years, watching us kids, before he got bolder and eventually made his first known appearance. I was 11 or 12 at the time, and I was sitting in my bed in my underwear reading a book at around 11 p.m., when all of a sudden my mom burst into the room without knocking or saying anything. She stared out of my window into the darkness of the forest for a solid minute before I finally asked her what was going on. Without taking her eyes off the forest, she started shutting my drapes and sort of muttered, "There was some bearded man behind the Thompsons' window, staring at their daughter." The hair on my neck stood up as I grabbed my blankets and covered myself, shocked and disgusted. The Thompsons' daughter had been surfing on the internet in their computer room. When she had looked up and the rutabaga had been staring at her through the window just inches away, his face pressed on the glass. They called the cops, but by the time they got to the Thompsons, the peeping Tom was long gone. But at least now we had some sort of a description of the man. He had a messy orange beard and messy orange hair, big glasses, and very bad skin. We were all pretty shook up by this sudden intrusion of privacy in our safe little community bubble. The first appearance happened during the darkening nights of the fall, this is important, and the second during the following winter in very similar circumstances. My friend was in the computer room alone. She had looked up and out of the window and screamed in utter horror as she saw a man staring back at her from the darkness. Her father, who was home at the time, didn't waste a second, and he ran out the front door yelling, but by the time he reached the computer room's window, the sneaky pervert had already escaped and was nowhere to be found. After this incident, nobody saw the rutabaga for a while. The spring came and the evenings got lighter. I don't remember why we started calling him the rutabaga, but by the time the summer came, everybody in the neighborhood was using that name. Then the summer turned into another fall, and as soon as it started to get dark outside again, he was spotted behind another family's window, this time a good 2 blocks away from ours. I had been sleeping with my curtains closed and my door locked for a year now, and for the first time in my life, I was creeped the fuck out to come home from a friend's house after dark. Mostly because a large portion of my journey home was along those trails that connected the forest patches, and it had become very clear to everyone very soon that the rutabaga was using these same trails to get from one block to another without being noticed. Since this was such a long time ago, I don't remember the timeline of the events exactly, but after 2 or 3 years, the fall was everyone's cue to shut their drapes. We had a hunting dog in our front yard, so it was rather difficult to sneak behind one of our windows without being greeted by loud barking, but eventually the rutabaga solved the dog problem too. Another dark winter passed, and in spring, I, my kid brother, and our friends decided to play a detective game in the safety of the sunny daylight. We were going to find out which trails the rutabaga used. Sounds quite impossible, right? Not really, since he left little breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts behind whenever he was peeping at a family. My little brother and I actually discovered this when we were playing in that little trail that runs behind my parents' house. The snow had finally melted, and I think we were cycling along the trail when we noticed something white and blue under this huge bushy spruce. Of course we had to investigate what it was, being our backyard spruce and all. There were dozens of breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts. It didn't take us long to notice that from the safety of this big tree, one could easily see right into our living room, and the dog in the front yard would never know you were there. We told our friends about our discovery, and soon we were all searching for more candy wrappings and cigarette butts from the close vicinity of each of our homes, and we found plenty. There was always a big tree or a rock or something where he could watch 1 or 2 houses at the same time. After following his trail of candy wrappings, we found his camp. It was located behind a small hill just a few hundred yards away from my cousin's house. There were remains of a campfire, empty vodka bottles, and probably hundreds of breath mint wrappings and cigarette butts. We were quite freaked out, but I and my brother decided to mindfuck him for a change. We took one of the empty bottles, filled it with candy wrappings and cigarette butts, went back home, and placed the bottle right under the spruce where he'd been stalking our family. A few days later we went to check it out, and the bottle had been smashed into teeny tiny pieces in what seemed like a fit of rage. It was our way of saying, "Fuck you, asshole, we see you," and I think he got the message. That summer, we heard that on the other side of the forest patch that was next to our house, a woman had woken up in the middle of the night because she felt like someone was staring at her. She'd gotten up to find her house's back door wide open. She didn't see anyone, but we all knew who had been inside her house. The rutabaga was definitely getting bolder, and while we had thought that he didn't operate during summer because of the light nights, we couldn't have been more wrong. He avoided our block, but terrorized all the other blocks around us. People would wake up to the sound of someone groping the outdoor handles or someone walking in their yard at night. He'd also been to a couple of other houses as well, getting in through the back door and leaving before the family could fathom that someone was in their bedroom. Then all of a sudden these creepy incidents stopped. Also by now, people were most certainly locking their doors and taking precautions. For 2 years, nothing happened, but we finally realized who the rutabaga was. Less than 2 blocks away from my house lived an alcoholic male in his mid-30s. He fit the description of the Peeping Tom, and he had been sentenced to prison for drunk driving. So we all knew who the fucker was, and he knew that we knew. But the cops couldn't arrest him for what he'd done because he hadn't been caught red-handed, nor had anyone properly seen his face in the darkness. Another few years passed and nothing weird happened. We heard that he was in prison again for drunk driving, again. It almost seemed like the rutabaga had retired from terrorizing his neighbors. His name had turned into a bit of a joke anyway. For years I'd been afraid of this creepy asshole lurking in my forest, but now when people spoke of him it was more like, "Oh, he's in prison again? Well, at least he can't stalk anyone there." But the rutabaga came back. This happened 3 to 5 years ago. It's now even harder for me to keep track on things that have happened in my old neighborhood since I haven't lived there for years, but my parents are still there and so is he. Earlier I mentioned that he had sort of a camp near my cousin's house. My cousins live about a block away from my parents' house. My uncle has 2 hunting dogs and their cages are located in their backyard, about 30 yards away from the closest forest trail. My 2 little girl cousins, I think their ages at the time were around 10 and 13, were going to sleep in a tent that night in the backyard. It was a warm summer night and they had 2 big dogs to guard them, so why not? Also, their parents were home. So they go to sleep in their tent, and my uncle is sleeping in the house in his bedroom with a window that faces the backyard. Around 3 a.m. his hunting dogs are going batshit crazy, barking and howling like there's no tomorrow. He doesn't think much of it at first. I can't blame him. His dogs bark at fucking pine cones falling from the trees. But as the ruckus gets louder and louder, he gets up to check the dogs. He opens the blinds just in time to see an unknown man with a messy beard opening the zipper into his daughter's tent, the girls screaming in terror inside. My uncle chased the fucker through the forest, but the rutabaga had had a car waiting for him in the trail, and once again he got away. The girls were shocked but unharmed. I wish I could say that this voyeuristic asshole is behind bars, but he's not. He's still living in the same house, right next to the people he's been stalking and harassing for over a decade. But what can you do? There's no solid evidence against him, and he hasn't actually hurt anyone, even after he tried to crawl into my cousin's tent. I think the cops are just not taking this perv seriously. I also run into him quite frequently in a grocery store when I'm visiting my parents, and the way he fucking stares at me makes my skin crawl. I can tell that he knows who I am, and there's no rational reason for him to recognize me in public unless he's been stalking me. The street where my parents live is a dead end. There's nothing but forest and a few neighbors surrounding them, and that fuckhead lives on the other side of the district, so he really shouldn't know who I am. I haven't heard about him for years now, but I find it hard to believe that he would just stop, considering how bold he had gotten. I just hope that nobody gets hurt when he decides to try something bolder than crawling into the tent of 2 underage girls. If we meet in the trail, rutabaga, I hope I'm carrying a Lucille with me. This is a story I haven't shared till recently, probably 3 months ago. I've only told 2 people, and I think getting it out there might bring me some peace. Just a quick few notes. My dad is a drug addict who relapsed a 1.5 years ago, and his life went downhill fast. He lost his house last year around March to the bank, so it's been sitting abandoned since with some of my dad's and brother's stuff still inside. Also, I live in a small town, with maybe 300 people inside city limits. Many are druggies or sex offenders, and since there's no police, it's easy to get away with shit. But back to my story. My grandma gave my dad an electric heater last February to keep warm since his gas had been cut, and he never bothered to give it back. It's been really cool this year. Even though at the time it was the end of February, it still felt like the dead of winter. My grandma asked if I would drive over there and pick it up because her bedroom had no heater, and she wanted to get it before the next snowstorm. I reluctantly agreed, mostly because I was tired of sharing my space heater. I drive over there, not bringing my money or even my knife with me, thinking I'd be home fast, since my dad's was only 3 blocks away. Let me explain first the layout of the house. It's a small 2-bedroom house. You walk in, and there's a small living room, and to the right about 5 feet away is a hallway with a bedroom at both ends, and the bathroom is in the middle of the hall. I walk in. Since the bank nor my dad decided to lock up the house, the windows are open, except my dad's bedroom, which is the bedroom closest to the living room, about 10 feet around a corner. I walk in, and I get a worse feeling than what I had before. I tell myself it's just my anxiety, and that nothing was wrong. Then I hear something that makes me freeze where I stood. A loud, low groan coming from my dad's room. For some reason, I look to the kitchen, which is almost a straight shot from the living room, and notice there's cans of food on the counter. They're not dusty, and I know my dad didn't leave them there because my dad didn't have any food in his house. Then I hear another groan, and I stop moving completely. I try to tell myself it's my anxiety, but the feeling of danger refuses to leave. Then I hear a loud bang come from the room, as if someone is getting off the bed that my dad also didn't bother to get out of the house. I reach for my knife, but I know where it is. It's laying on my bedside table 3 blocks away. I quickly weigh my options. I'm a 6-foot-tall, 200-pound 17-year-old who knows her way around a knife, but not knowing what I'm up against, I know I needed to book it out of there. I get the quick realization that the room is only 10 feet away around a corner. A few steps and whoever is in there will be out soon, and I will have been spotted. I don't even bother to shut the door. I book for my pickup that's 20 feet away on the side of the yard. I don't run around to the driver's side. I instead jump into the passenger side and quickly crawl to the other one. Thank God I had left the pickup running, so all I had to do was put it in drive and floorboard it out of there. I get to the end of the block, and I tell myself that I probably just imagined the whole thing, that it was my anxiety. But before I turn, I put the pickup in park and turn all the way around, and I'll always remember what I'd seen. Not one person, but 3 guys, standing on the porch looking in my direction. One of them holding what I'm presuming was a bat my little brother left behind. I'm not sure what happened between me being frozen in fear and me driving away. I think I blacked out for a few seconds out of fear, but the next thing I know, I'm speeding down the main road. I slow down a bit to turn, and I speed home. I lock my pickup and run inside like I was still being chased. I get in, and my grandma asks where her heater is. It took me 10 minutes to tell a somewhat cohesive story. My grandma insists I was just hearing things, and to this day she doesn't believe me. She tried to get me to go with her, but I refuse. No one's bothered to try and get it, and I sure as hell don't plan on it. I hate to think of what would have happened if I didn't leave. Would I have been killed or kidnapped, or even raped? I don't know where those guys came from, but I've never seen them before in town. They were probably a bunch of druggies running from the law. I live close, and I still pray that they don't ever decide to come and do something horrible. I sleep with my grandfather's gun by my side, leaning on my bedstand now, and I keep my knife inside the pillow next to me. Call me paranoid, and I'll admit it. I want to get my open carry license when I move into my own place. I'm going to carry my knife with me everywhere from now on. So 3 guys in my dad's house, let's not meet. And if we do, I'll have my knife this time. It's only today that I realize I've gone through a pretty bad abuse and stalking encounter. I still go to therapy for this, and this stuff won't leave my dreams, so maybe writing about it will help. This occurred from my freshman to start of sophomore year of high school, so I was like 14 or 15. I met this boy from some overlapping friend circles named Isaac. We both had very similar interests, and our friends thought we got along very well, so we both started dating, bonding over video games and other nerdy stuff. It was pretty cool. I thought he was perfect, and I was lucky. But yeah, I wouldn't be writing this if it didn't go downhill, and it did really fast. He put a lot of heavy things on me almost immediately after we started dating, saying he was abused, he would hurt himself, and he had a drinking problem. But he always told me it was alright, because I was here with him and that I would never leave him. At the time I thought that was really sweet, and it made me feel important, but I should have took those thoughts into consideration a lot more. We dated for half a year, but the last 3 months were agonizing. Isaac thought I could take care of him and fix his problems, so he would usually spend all of his cash on me, be really touchy in public, and threaten suicide when I wouldn't want to do even the smallest of things, like make out with him or have more intimate contact with him. I have some bad body issues, and I really didn't know what was comfortable for me in terms of contact, so it was really hard. I remember we were texting, and he wanted to do something that really crossed the line, and when I refused, he said, "Well, I wanted to do this so I won't kill myself. Guess I'll just cut deeper instead." Our breakup was really rocky, and I went through a period of months of him stalking me online, getting new phone numbers, texting me cryptic messages from random numbers. "You win. Don't worry, he's taken care of," were some of them. I still don't know what they meant. And making his friends deliver me letters because I refused to go near him. Most of Isaac's letters didn't make any sense, were all over the place, and usually also had very creepy drawings. Usually drawings of him with his arms cut up or him wounded and bleeding out in several places. I thought I threw away most of these, but they always seemed to pop up months later, in my desk in old school folders. But everything escalated a month after the breakup. I was a paranoid wreck. I didn't want to go to school or online, and my grades were failing. I still checked his Tumblr regularly, terrible now I realize, because I was so scared he was planning to do something to me, and that he was still watching me online. He had written a post, almost formatted like it was just an average event. He wrote in a pretty cheerful way that since the only thing he loved hated him, he was going to play one last round of his favorite video game, Super Meat Boy. Every time he died, he said he would take a shot of bleach. He said it should be pretty fun and different than most drinking games he's done, and that everyone should check in on his Tumblr 2 hours after school. Of course I was terrified. I thought I was a murderer and everything was my fault. I got in contact with his friends and we freaked out. The second his friend and I agreed we were calling 911 and told him that, he suddenly made a new post saying, "Fun's over, you guys. My mom is taking me to the hospital." When just minutes before, he made posts about how he was feeling faint and his mom didn't care. Yeah, I really didn't know much about how drinking bleach worked. My parents eventually got me to tell them what was going on and attempted to calm me down and contact his parents. While this was happening over a weekend, Isaac was updating his Tumblr and telling me things like how he was in the hospital, had to go into surgery, if I truly love him, and how he might die. I also started getting hostile anonymous messages blaming me for what happened and whatnot, and messages encouraging me to check his blog. I was hysterical that whole weekend, so I couldn't see how utterly ridiculous the situation was. When my mom finally had a chat with his mom, she said he was staying at his dad's house the whole weekend, and that she checked in with his dad and he said nothing out of the ordinary was going on. I was pretty shaken from what was happening. Luckily, Isaac was utterly terrified of my dad, so I would pull out my phone to call him if he tried to mess with me. There was a few minor stalking incidents, and one time where his friend forced us to talk, I ran away and nearly got hit by a car, and my parents intervening. But the drinking game situation was the worst of it. He moved across the state where all his family was during the beginning of my sophomore year, so I never saw him again. I still have trouble with physical contact, have nightmares, and I'm a lot more spaced out and despondent. But I'm just glad it's all over. I hope he's getting the help he needs now. So Isaac, let's not meet again. A few years ago, my friend Allison and I decided to head to a local beach on a hot summer day. We were in our pre-teens, so I had my mom drive us there. When we got there, it was incredibly crowded with little kids playing in the sand and on the nearby jungle gym. Allison and I decided to sit ourselves down in the sand and enjoy the heat, while my mom and one of her friends that she invited to come along kept an eye on us. We had probably been there a few hours, and at this point, the beach started to clear out as it got colder. Allison and I took a break from taking photos of each other planking, oh god, why was this even a thing, and sat across from each other chatting about the new Iron Man. I sensed something approaching us and looked over to see this 20-year-old Hispanic man coming up to us and start chatting to us. At first everything was fine, but then I noticed he kept nudging closer to us and looking around and behind him. It totally freaked me out. He then asked if we had boyfriends or if we liked older men, to which we both replied no. He scoffed and tried to convince us that we were basically the same age, which we didn't buy at all. While this was happening, Allison and I were texting each other back and forth, frantically trying to figure out how to get this guy to leave. She then told me that I should say I have to go to the bathroom. After a quick glare in her direction for making me have to do it, I did exactly that, and she quickly said, "Me too." We both stood up and walked to the brick bathroom house, while he of course followed us, pausing and waiting just outside. When we got inside, we started freaking out to each other about what to do, but when I poked my head out a few minutes later, he was gone. My mom was standing in front of the bathroom with her friend and told us that they noticed the guy acting weird and panicked when he followed us. She then said that her friend told the guy, "Hey, how about you get out of here?" When he tried to tell her that he was our friend from school, she made a scene. She was a small, young woman, but still totally intimidating. The guy then looked flustered and walked away. Allison and I were relieved after that and decided to go hang out on the jungle gym next to the bathroom house. When I looked to my right before we reached the jungle gym, I felt my stomach drop when I saw the man, along with 7 other sketchy guys, quickly leaving the area into the woods. I don't know what would have happened if the guy convinced us to somehow go somewhere with him. I'm just thankful my mom's friend stepped in and told him to beat it before we ended up on a milk carton. So a little backstory. I am female, 19 at the time of this incident, working as a waitress. It was at Ryan's buffet, so I didn't do much except fill drinks, bus tables, bring rolls, etc. It was around 7 p.m. on a Thursday night when I get a table in the furthest corner of the dining area. A man sits down by himself in the back corner. He is overweight, and it looks like his clothes haven't been washed. His hair is a black-gray color, and he looks to be around 50 or 60 years old. Everything is going great so far. I greet him happily, fill his drink, and bring dinner rolls to his table. He makes small talk with me about traveling, so I assume he is a truck driver at this point, as the area I'm in has 2 major interstates running through it. I come back to his table to check up on him and see if his meal is to his liking. Our conversation went like this. I say, "How is everything? Anything I can get for you?" "I'm fine." "Hey, is this chicken done?" "Well, I hope so. Is it flailing around and squawking on your plate?" "No. But do you know what I like to see squawk? Little kids." And then proceeds to take a big bite of chicken and laugh. I wish I was kidding about that last line, but he seemed very pleased with his confession, like seeing the blood drain from my face aroused him in the sickest way possible. Thoroughly creeped out, I walk away to take care of my other customers and fully intend to tell my manager. He is just sitting in the corner at this point, watching my every move. I could feel his eyes on me as I walked around the room, and I grew more and more disturbed by the minute. Every time I looked up, he was staring at me. It creeped me the hell out. There was only one manager there that day, and she was in the office making a phone call. 2 huge safes are stored in that room, so obviously I can't get in as the door automatically locks when shut. I knocked and waited a few minutes, and she finally let me in. I rushed in and told her what had happened. I described where he was seated before we exited the office. There would be no obvious pointing in his direction. We exit the office and both casually look in that direction, only to see an empty table. The man was gone, so I immediately start scanning the buffet frantically. Thursday nights were also kids' night, where kids ate free, so quite a few people went out with their families. I look over to the dessert bar and see him talking to 2 little girls putting toppings on their ice cream. He is crouched down to their level and way too close. I can see that he is talking to them, but can't hear what he is saying. I point him out to my manager, and he looks up and sees the both of us staring and pointing. He then takes off out the front door and walks to the edge of the parking lot, down the small slope leading to the sidewalk below, and disappears. Like I said in the beginning, it was already later in the evening, so it was hard to see exactly where he went, but the semi-trucks always parked on the side of the building, and that was the direction he took off. My guess is that he walked around the perimeter so that the cameras on our building didn't see what vehicle he left in. I'm just glad he saw the 2 of us and changed his mind about whatever plans he had for those 2 girls. So creepy pedophile I took care of at Ryan's, let's not meet.